Hi, I'm Michael Watkins, and I'm just delighted today to be able to talk with our wonderful new president at IMD, David Bach, about his first 90 days. David, great to see you.
It's great to see you, Michael. Looking forward to the conversation.
So David, you've now been close to 90 days in the new role. You've been through a lot. There's a lot that's been going on, but what have you found most surprising in the first 90 days?
Yeah, so I think we're at day 87, and what has most surprised me is how different the role ended up being from what I thought. You see, I've been very fortunate to work very closely with deans of top business schools, of course, with my predecessor, and so I thought I kind of knew what the role was about, but there are things that you discover that you just really hadn't thought about. So the most surprising thing is that the role is different from what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Exactly.
I love it. Look, it's not uncommon, right? I work a lot, as you know, with first-time CEOs, and in fact, it's my favorite audience to work with, right? And it's quite common for those folks to feel like they were ready and get in the role and find out they're not as ready as they thought they were. Now, one area where that often happens is with the management of the external environment, all those key stakeholders. But that's an area you're deeply familiar with, and I expect that's not where you necessarily found the surprises. What was surprising?
Well, there were surprises there, but the surprises were very much like how much goodwill and support there is for this institution. I mean, in my previous role, I was exposed to some of our external stakeholders, but not all. So I spent more time with alumni, with supporters, with CEOs of organizations that we work with very closely, with government officials, and I just picked up enormous goodwill and support for the institution. So that was a really nice.
That's a positive surprise.
That's a positive surprise,
Yep.
and I didn't fully expect this because I just hadn't been exposed to it. I think one sort of interesting, I don't know if it's a surprise, but an interesting learning is, I have my own leadership style that I've developed. I also thought quite a bit during a long transition that we might speak about how I wanted to step into the role. One of the things that's been interesting for me is the extent to which people have sort of projected or tried to project onto me what they thought the role was going to be about. Yes. And that I had to sort of actively counteract that in some way to really make sure I ended up doing it the way I was hoping to do it.
Yeah. And that interplay between role and your style, I think, is a fascinating one, right? And I think you do have to sort of find your own way with it all. And people will project always their expectations onto you, right? But what about the internal leadership dimensions of this? I mean, were there parts of that you found surprising, particularly challenging? And I mean, you've been at this institution for a while. You've had a lot of experience in academic leadership previously, so it's not like you're brand new. Yeah. But were there still things that were different? So
I start again with a positive surprise. That same kind of goodwill and support that I felt outside of IMD, I felt inside, right? From our most senior faculty colleagues to our most junior interns that we have in the organization, I've just felt a lot of support and embrace and enthusiasm. Look, what's been challenging is because I've been around and I've gotten to know people. For some of them, I've had to deliver some not so good news about how their role was going to evolve, right? And so, the surprising thing there is just that's hard, right? Yeah. Because you care about people you've worked with, and so I found that challenging. Of course, I know they found it challenging as well.
Yeah, no, of course. But it's interesting, right? Because people do think they know you before you take on the new role, but they know you through the lens of the roles you're playing, right? And so there is this interesting almost reset you need to do of expectations around this, and of course the delivery of bad news is a key piece of that. You inherited an institution that has tremendous strengths, is viewed as a world leader, in education, but has its challenges. And I guess I wonder, how did you engage with that kind of interesting mix of the good news, but also the challenging stuff?
I was fortunate that I had a transition period during which I was able to signal to stakeholders internally and externally that I was very much in listening mode. And I think even into the first 90 days, I've continued to do both formal and informal listening. So as you know, in faculty meetings, senior staff meetings, community meetings, there are opportunities to ask questions, to get feedback, and we did a lot of that early on. But I also dropped in on team meetings, tried to understand what people are doing. This is sort of inside the organization and externally, as I said before, meeting people. And so, through that, I think I was able to check my own assumptions about what was going well and what wasn't. There were some areas that I thought were going really well, and actually I've become a bit more concerned. There's some other areas where my prior was that things weren't going as well, and I actually now have realized that there's a lot there, and with just a couple of small tweaks we can actually get it to where it needs to be.
That's great. So having a significant transition, which you did, right, between being appointed and actually taking charge, that can be a joy and a sorrow, right? I mean, the good news is, as you described, you have that time to really begin to learn, connect before you're formally in the seat. But there's a certain amount of frustration that goes with it. And it's not at all uncommon for leaders who are promoted from the inside to CEO roles to have a very long list of things they want to do.
Yeah.
Kind of pent-up demand for things they want to change. And I guess I wonder how you sort of calibrated a bit around the level of aspiration versus the realities of what you were facing.
Yeah, and I think that list got more specific, more concrete, even through the selection process, right? So you're right, the transition was about 4 months. I think, Jean-François Manzoni, my predecessor, and I, we organized a very good transition, a lot of support from the board and other stakeholders, right? So it worked quite smoothly. But in many ways, the process started earlier. It was about a year ago that the process started in earnest. The search committee ran a very structured process, asked for a white paper of thoughts, really challenging interviews. And so, I had a list before the process started, but then the process itself added to my list, got me to reflect and so on. So you come in with this list of things to do. And this is my second role at IMD. I stepped into a role of Dean of Innovation and Programs. And of course, it was during the pandemic. There was a lot to do. I came from the outside. And again, I came in with a list of things that I wanted to do. One of the things that I learned, and you write about it in first 90 days, is be careful to make some quick decisions without having some of the information. And I certainly fell into that trap in my previous roles. So I've really tried to balance, on the one hand side, a couple of quick wins, which is important, but on the other hand, not rushing to judgment in some areas. And so what I'm finding now, almost 3 months in, that we're beginning to work on some of the things that I knew we needed to work on, but it was good not to spend the first month or two right away, trying to push those items.
But that's not easy either, right? Because I think, there's this tendency to want to vault into action. Sometimes, I call it the action imperative. You want to kind of start to prove to people they made the right choice in appointing you. And I think there's a real balancing act that has to go on. Years ago, I interviewed the CEO of CVS, and he described his strategy as coming in and making a few small, non-consequential changes because he wanted to communicate that he was decisive but had decided not to decide yet on some key issues. So there's a real balancing act that I think you need to be working on throughout this whole process. How about the team, David, right? So, I mean, as you know, when I write about the first 90 days, the team is a central part of, I think of it as the leader amplification system, right? It's the way you're going to really start to have an impact in the org. And of course, you inherit a team, but it's not your team. You've got to do assessments. You've got to think about how to evolve it. How did you go through that process? What was challenging about it?
You highlight that it isn't just one team, right? There's your support team, there's your leadership team, there's your external team that becomes really important. So I've been working on all of them. The support team, relatively, nothing is really straightforward, but that came together relatively quickly. Yep. And I had some ideas about the president's office, because again, there's the person, there's the role, but it's a part of an institution, and how I wanted the president's office to function. And I have great colleagues there who are doing an amazing job. The leadership team is the one that I probably spend the most time on. And again, I had the benefit of having been here, new people, and through the search and selection process itself had thought about what I would want that team to look like. And for me, it was very important that it be a smaller team, a more integrated team, a team that could function even without my sort of daily intervention, because clearly in the next phase of IMD's development, I'll be spending more time outside, engaging with alumni, engaging with clients, cultivating philanthropic support, working with donors, with the media and so on. And so that means I need to have a team that can function, right? And it also had to be a diverse team in terms of backgrounds, life experiences, strengths, tenure at IMD. We have some people who've been around for a long time, some people who joined more recently. But it did mean making some changes to the previous team, not just adding to the team, but also asking some folks to assume different roles.
Which is not easy.
That wasn't easy. That was the hardest part.
Yeah.
So that's working well. And then, of course, developing the relationships with the board, the chair, the vice chair, other people who are important. So that's been an important part of this time.
So I want to get to the board in a sec, but just with the team, right? I mean, the composition of the team, the right people in the right roles is obviously a crucial part. But learning to play together is another part. And I guess I wonder how you've thought about that, how you've kind of worked to begin to pull the team together to be a team.
Still figuring this out. We started actually the very first meeting of our executive committee that I led. We met in the meeting room where these meetings usually take place, and I said, okay, let's go for a walk, and we're going to go in pairs. We're going to meet in half an hour at this place, and I set people up in pairs, and gave some questions that I was hoping they would discuss with one another. We met this was back in August, we met in a cafe in Lausanne, there, switched it up, another pair, switched it up again. By the end, by lunchtime, we had sort of walked through much of Lausanne, and everybody had spent quality time with everybody else. So that was helpful. And then about a month later, we spent a day and a half together offsite to really do some team building, set up a charter. And even with that, Michael, we're still working through it. I'm still trying to find the right balance between being inclusive, which is my nature, my style, and creating a lot of space, but at the same time making sure in our meetings we drive towards outcomes and hold ourselves accountable to deliver. So I'd be lying if I said I have this figured out, but I think we have a good basis and we're working together as a team to get a good rhythm.
So that last piece you mentioned I think is fascinating, right? I mean, the question of the balancing between use of authority and building consensus. And I know you well enough to know that on balance you'd prefer to build consensus if you can. What have you learned about the balancing of that?
I've learned that you can be inclusive even if at times you cut off debate and you say, I think we're moving on and here's what we're going to do. And I think people can distinguish between your values, and how you'd like to engage, and still recognize that at a particular moment, we've been discussing this enough, right? And in fact, your team members who want you to be inclusive also want you to be the one who says at one point, look, I think we've debated this enough, and here's what we're going to do.
No, it's crucial, I think, right? And also there are sometimes decisions where there really are going to be winners and losers, and you can go around and around forever and mostly end up generating conflict if you're not careful, right? So knowing, I think, when to kind of call the question or say, look, I've taken input, here's where we're going to go, right? And basically, even if people are in the end unhappy, they feel like the process has been honored, their voices have been heard, and the key, I think, then is making sure everyone really lines up behind the outcome and starts.
And I think, you and I both are interested in questions of sort of strategy and to some extent game theory and that how that comes into play, right? It's sort of a repeat interaction, right? And so, in round one, I might be cutting off debate here. In round two, I might be doing it there. In round three, there. And if you're in that particular round, you may not like it, but we can all collectively agree it's probably a good thing to have that, right? So a well-functioning good to some extent or a well-functioning team, I should say, is a public good, and we're working on creating it.
Well, I think that's a really critical observation, right? Because, when I work with enterprise leadership teams, I'm often talking about the need to wear the two hats, right? To represent your function, your group, your department, but also be able to be willing to make some compromise for the good of the enterprise. Yeah. And the best, leaders on those teams are the ones that are able to look from at the enterprise viewpoint.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've got people on your team that are doing that?
Yeah, and that was really important to me. I think the dynamic that we had before was one where we were a bit more focused on our respective area of responsibility, and at the leadership level, it was more sort of coordination across. I take seriously this idea of sort of, team one. Like, we're one team, we're running the whole institution, and we bring to it different perspectives that are partially rooted in the area that we're responsible for, but it's got to start with us as a team. Again, this is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, especially because a number of us have been working in a slightly different way in the past that made sense in that particular moment. But I certainly sense that everybody's committed to that really being a brain trust, a team that we can all rely on to make the important decisions.
That's wonderful, right? Because it's frankly kind of rare, right? It's not unusual for me to go to work with senior leadership teams and find they're not really teams at all, right? They're groups, sometimes high performing, sometimes not so high performing. You mentioned a little earlier the board, right? And I guess your reflections on how the board has supported you through this process, what you would say to other incoming CEOs about what to aspire to have your board do for you.
Yeah. So this is a way in which this role is completely different from what I did before. I always had a boss, and I still do, but it's 9 people. And in our case, our supervisory board is a sort of subset of our foundation board, which has 60 members or so. And I just had the first meeting, face-to-face meeting with the entire foundation board a couple of weeks ago. And so that's interesting, particularly then building those relationships. Of course, you work very closely with your chair, your vice chair. I've known them for a long time. I've benefited from their mentorship and guidance. And at the same time, I'm learning about what that interaction is like. What are the kind of issues that I need to escalate to them? How do I align around priorities with them? What is the level of involvement that they expect? So a lot of conversation. I've been very fortunate that they're incredibly accessible. We have a little WhatsApp group, the chair, the vice chair, and me. And the mere fact that they're willing to engage with me in this way is super helpful.
Huge. So what have been the most important things they've done, though, to support you in the transition itself, right? I mean, because it's an interesting situation. You've gone through this whole selection process. There were some great candidates for the role. Ultimately, they converge on you, and things change, right? Now you're the de facto incoming leader. What did they do for you? What would you want to tell other CEOs, new CEOs, to hope for or work with their board to get in terms of support?
So what has been really great, what they have done so well, and I hope every incoming CEO or leader is as fortunate, is they'll give you candid advice, particularly if you ask, but they're not going to make the decision for you. They're not even put you in a corner where you have to do what it is that they're looking for. And in my case in particular, just a lot of support. There was a colleague who I was hoping to have on the leadership team, and he wasn't quite sure if he wanted to do this. And the chair said, "Look, let me speak to him. Let me offer my perspective on this," and that was incredibly helpful. But also, helping align for the first couple of board meetings, not just around the agenda, but also how to get the balance right between reporting on what we're doing, but also asking some good questions, because I want to benefit from their expertise. And the last thing I'll say is they have not pushed me to accelerate on our strategy formulation. They know that we're working on a comprehensive strategy for IMD. They'll certainly look forward to engagement around that, but they also haven't expected me to have all the answers sort of 4 weeks in.
Got it. When do they expect you to have the answers? And where are you in the process of working out what the vision and strategy will be?
So the vision I've been pretty clear about from the beginning, and it came very much out of reflections and conversations during the search process itself, and I put it in my white paper. I want IMD to become and be recognized as the most impactful business school in the world. And that's bold and lofty because, we're a fairly small school in a lovely but fairly small city in an amazing but fairly small country. But we have that incredible multiplier effect that comes from being able to work with senior leaders, with boards, with top teams, and the impact that we have on them has impact on large organizations, on their business partners, on communities. So that's what I'm hoping for us to lean into. And I articulated that very early on from the first day I was presented. And we've been now building the strategy underneath that, right? So how do we go about achieving that? How do we work with what we've got? And multiple rounds of getting input from faculty, from staff colleagues, from clients, from alumni. And we're making good progress. My hope is to present a sort of rough draft of this in January. We have a big meeting coming up then with our faculty and senior staff.
Command performance.
I was going to say, that some of them might be watching this, so they're going to hold me accountable to that. And then, the next board meeting is when I would hope to present something that is fairly close to done. But again, when I say done, look, the world is changing fast. I expect it will be perhaps not a living document, but one that we revise frequently. But I do hope that by the end of the first quarter of 2025, we'll have a pretty robust roadmap.
So when we teach, about strategy here, we often teach that strategy is about choice, right? Is there an example of a choice you're grappling with that is particularly important from the strategic direction of the institution?
Yeah, sure. And actually, before I answer that question, I should say, in our team conversations about the strategy, one of my colleagues said, if strategy is about choices, the document should include a list of things that we have decided not to do based on the criteria that we establish about what we're trying to do. And it's been super helpful. And we've been challenging ourselves to put things on the list because, you always want to hedge a little bit and you're like, well, maybe we don't close the door on this. And of course, it's never really closed. But I think to signal to the organization, we mean it, we have thought about some of the things we're not going to do are important. But I'll just give you one example, right? When I talk about impact and having more impact, well, you can have more impact by having broader reach geographically. You can have more impact by reaching deeper within organizations. You can have impact by having different ways of impacting people beyond our core activity of executive education programs. But you probably can't do all three of them at the same time, right? So it's a very sort of, geography versus products versus customer kind of question. And we're wrestling with that a little bit right now.
No, it's such a good example, David, right? I mean, I when I talk about strategy and strategic thinking these days, I often start with, gosh, aren't we lucky to be living in the most extraordinary times in recent human history, right? With what's going on with technology, what's going on, with climate, what's going on with the political, social, great power conflict. This is kind of bread and butter for you, right? But how do you think about positioning the institution given the incredible turbulence that's going on? What's the playbook for doing that?
Yeah, I think in that environment, even more than in sort of simpler times, leaders need a place to come together. Whether that coming together is physical or virtual isn't the point. It's a point where you can. It's a place where you can come together, where you can ask the tough questions, not settle for the easy answers, get inspired by the people around you, but also get challenged in your thinking. And I think IMD has always been that place. It's that place where you, on the one hand side, sort of recharge and re-energize as a leader, but also you walk out with a plan. Here's what we'll do. Or at the very least, you walk out with a couple of tools that you can use to make more sense of the world around you. So I think that's even more important in this environment of dramatic geopolitical change, massive environmental challenges, a new generation of people coming into organizations, into the workforce with very different expectations of leaders. So what I want is that when, as leaders and organizations grapple with some of those issues and they ask themselves, where can we go for insights? Who can we engage in conversation around this? Where can we come together? It's right here. I think
I've been working lately a lot on strategic thinking, and the reason I'm doing that is because of this turbulence,
Yeah.
right? I think that if you're not able to think strategically, not much else really matters, you know? And I felt like there wasn't really a great definition of strategic thinking, not some precision about how you measure it and build it. But what are your thoughts about, to you, what is strategic thinking, and maybe even more importantly, how do you build it in your team, right, as a way to help drive the adaptation you're talking about?
Yeah, I think you do need to start with vision. So vision is prior to strategy. You need to spend the time just getting people aligned around what it is that we're trying to achieve. Like very often, if you don't have a vision, then your strategy becomes an action plan, and it's just not the same. And so that's what we've spent quite a bit of time on. But then I think it's surfacing assumptions, it's questioning assumptions, it's that's where the diversity of the team comes in, and putting in that effort and thinking through, if we think that this is true, what else must be true? What is not going to be true, right? Exactly. If we're doing this, what are the implications of that? So appreciating the sort of interdependencies, you advise people on how to do this, and you've written really thoughtfully about this, and we're relying on that and trying to make better decisions. You recognize you're not going to get everything right, but I think you can approach it in a more structured, systematic way, but always keeping in mind that there's a goal, there's something that you're working towards.
That's so critical, David, 100%. I mean, a big piece of it too these days, I think, is the ability of organizations to sense and respond to what's going on, right? I think if you're not sensing and responding, or at least sensing, right, emerging threats, opportunities, you're not really able then to craft the right vision, envision the right scenarios, and so on. How do you want this institution and your team to be thinking about sensing and responding to what's happening in the world? Because the world of business education, obviously, is very dynamic.
Yeah, I think we're more focused on our clients and their evolving needs, quite frankly, than than focused on some of our peer institutions, right? So in our industry, you know this, we're academics, we're always looking at what are the others doing, right? And so sometimes, you end up doing what all the other business schools do, but you don't focus enough on, who are the learners, who are the organizations, what are their needs. So I think at IMD, we're really trying to make sure that when we think about the external environment, it's the external environment of our clients, of our learners, of our students, the labor market that is evolving. And sure, what some other business schools are doing or some other players in learning are doing can provide inputs to that. But the most important thing is just, big picture, how is that evolving? But then also, not, there's this saying, right? The paralysis by analysis, right? And we can't end up in a place where, because we haven't fully understood what the world is going to look like, we just can't swing into action. And so we are, I think, also trying to remind ourselves that we're agile at IMD. We can turn relatively quickly, certainly more quickly than other institutions, in part because our partners and clients expect it of us. So we don't have to have everything always figured out, as long as we're in touch with the evolving needs of our clients and partners.
I think it's a great observation, right? I think you've identified already sort of two real sources of dynamic competitive advantage for IMD, right? That customer centricity, that deep attention to what the customer cares about, but also the agility piece. Are there other things that you think of as kind of core competitive advantages of the institution vis-a-vis our competitors?
I think so. So at the heart of it clearly sits this extraordinary community of people that you and I have both experienced and appreciated. I think particularly as an academic, you come to IMD and you're like, wow, this is incredible. There's a community of people here that acts like a community, and it's deep. People are invested in the institution. They're invested in one another's success. We talk about it as collegiality, but it really is that way. Like this idea of my colleagues, right? We take that very seriously, and we have an amazing group of professionals who support us in all of that. So I think that's where it starts. The other thing I'll add is governance. It's we are an independent institution. We don't have big financial backers. We're a relatively small place. And the upside is that it means we have simplified governance. It's just us. We can move pretty quickly. We don't have big bureaucratic processes. We're too busy for committees, and so we have to decide. Sometimes
too busy for many committees.
Exactly. So sometimes just a couple of conversations in the hallway, and then we move. So I would add the community for sure, and then governance to your list.
Yeah. The collegiality piece, I think, is so interesting and important, right? I mean, you and I have both been part of other institutions where. And I've been part of institutions where I always said that the best I could ever hope for was an absence of negative feedback, Yes. So there's something about the culture of the place, there's something about collegiality that's really, I think, critical. So what's the next 90 days all about?
Yeah, so the next 90 days is going to be about, I was going to say finalizing our strategy. Again, it won't ever be finalized. We talked about getting it 80% right, but I think we want to put something in front of our colleagues, in front of our stakeholders that they can react to, give us some feedback to, and then have it as a working document that can inform what others are doing. I'm picking up feedback from parts of the organization where they say, all right, what's next? We have a vision, but how are we going to get there? And of course, again, my desire is for everybody to put their own sort of brain power into that and help us figure it out. But people do need a bit of a scaffold and a structure. So that's going to be an important part of it. I'm still hoping to add 1 or 2 members to the leadership team. I think we have roles there that we want to fill, and we're making good progress there. But then also integrating them, and again, taking the time to make sure that those who've joined us, most likely from the outside, bond with everybody else, and then I'll hit the road and I'll try to sell it. And not that you got to sort of sell the institution. The institution, as I said, benefits from so much goodwill. But I do want to engage our clients, our partners, our alumni, our supporters around what we're trying to do. And I think there's an opportunity for us. This is certainly feedback I've picked up, that there are enough good things going here that we can talk about a little bit more. We can tell people a bit more about the difference that we make, the impact that we have, the strength of this community. So I'll spend some more time externally oriented already in the next 90 days trying to tell the good story of what's going on here and build more support.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it all evolves, David, and thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.